So welcome everyone to MAF Speaks. Tonight, James Cowan joins us, and James is the CEO of Halo Trust. Halo is an organization dedicated to removing landmines throughout the world. And through that, so by doing that, they're protecting lives, creating jobs, and empowering women. And we are really pleased to have a long-term partner like Halo be able to join us and just talk to us a bit about the work that they do. So welcome, James.
Good evening, Brad, and thank you so much for your introduction. And it's a pleasure actually to be working alongside MAF. We have so much in common, not least the countries that we work in. So thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, when we talked on Friday, I got a bit of a sense that the two organizations really do have a lot in common about how we work. Can you just tell us a bit about yourself? I've looked at some of the interviews you've done online, and you just have a fascinating background. So talk to us a bit about that.
Well, I don't really. I mean, I used to be a soldier. I was in the army for 30 years. I come from a military family. My father and grandfather were soldiers too. And I was in the British Army for 32 years, actually. And I decided in 2015 that I wanted to have a change. I was 51 years old. And I thought it'd be good to start a second career then. So I had a look around and saw the Halo Trust and thought, there's an organization that I could, I hope, add something to. So I've been with Halo ever since, and it's been an extraordinary privilege to work for the Halo Trust and meet its mission in the world.
Well, I think you're being incredibly modest. I watched some of those interviews and was pretty enthralled with some of the background that you went into and some of the leadership struggles and challenges that you talked about in some of the military campaigns that you were involved with. So yeah, I found that pretty amazing. So talk to us a bit more about how you became the CEO of Halo. I mean, you mentioned a bit about that, but that's quite a switch from the military to a charity.
I think in some ways it is a big switch. I mean, the most obvious point is that the military is any nation's lethal instrument. It is about the application of force. And of course, the humanitarian world is about doing no harm. So, in some ways you could say, these are the opposite ends of the spectrum. But I think in other ways, there's much more in common. I think most people now view armies like the Canadian Army or the British Army as forces for good, that they are here to keep the peace, and where war happens, they're to end that war and to help the people. They're more actually there not to defeat the enemy, but to win the people. And so I can see a lot in common with what I do here in the Halo Trust, where I'm saving lives and restoring livelihoods. And I think the particular skills that I have that might be of some value is that I'm, I think, trained to manage risk. I'm trained to manage people across a very dispersed environment. We're in 25 countries. We have 9,000 staff. And I think you need to have a pretty good feel for geopolitics and for all the various, sadly, conflicts that are taking place out there in the world. Our biggest country is Afghanistan, and we're involved in really anywhere that there is conflict or has been conflict. So I believe that my previous career as a soldier is helpful in that regard.
I thought I knew a little bit about Halo Trust, certainly to speak about it to some of our supporters. And then I heard you in an interview say that the H in Halo stands for hazardous. And then I realized that maybe I didn't know as much as I thought, because apparently the acronym has a meaning. So can you tell us what the name means, and then just describe a bit about the work you do?
Yeah, well, actually, Brad, if I'm really honest, I mean, the acronym is a little bit contrived. It's the Hazardous Area Life Support Organization. And of course, that doesn't quite work, but everyone calls it the Halo Trust or Halo for short.
Okay, so you're actually trying to keep the acronym a secret then, which is why I've never heard about it.
Yeah, it is a secret. But nevertheless, I think there is some seriousness in this. The hazardous bit is important. Yeah. I am incredibly proud of the work my people do in some of the most hazardous places in the world. It isn't just dangerous, it's also very austere. We work in countries as different as Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and Yemen and Libya. These are places where it really is pretty dangerous to be. And so we have to manage that reality. And it isn't just a military threat. We have people who are living extremely remotely in very isolated conditions. And you need to be a certain sort of person to have a certain degree of maturity and self-reliance to be able to cope with that. And not everybody does. So, and in a way, that's even more impressive than people in the military who tend to go to different operations en masse in several thousand soldiers. That's not the case with us. We're working in very small numbers in very different parts of the world.
I think one of the first questions our viewers might have is, what you do is incredibly dangerous. I mean, you're getting rid of landmines. How do you do that and maintain some margin of safety? How does that work?
Well, it is dangerous, and very sadly, over the weekend, two individuals who work for the Norwegian People's Aid, who are a partner organisation of Halo, were killed in the Solomon Islands clearing Second World War ordnance, and indeed one of them used to work for Halo. So,
I'm sorry to hear that.
I mean, it's a reality that we live with. But essentially, you're dealing with lethal ordnance that has been built by humans in factories. And it is built to a specification. And if you understand that specification and you apply the drills correctly, then it should be possible to clear that ordnance safely. And we put a huge amount of effort into training our people. We're the only one of the international mine action organizations that does train all our own staff ourselves. And we're very proud of that fact. But whilst we can be sure of the kind of factory specification of most landmines, increasingly we're being asked to deal with improvised explosive devices, not built by the Soviet Union or the United States or another country, but built within individual homes, cottage industry construction that are then deployed in Afghanistan or Syria. And because they are homemade, they're often very fragile, temperamental, and not built to a specification. So there are dangers associated with that that are much higher than for factory-produced landmines.
After you and I talked on Friday, I went and did a bit more reading, and I was surprised to find that there's a bit of a connection with Halo and Canada through the Ottawa Treaty.
Correct. I mean,
and when I saw that, I thought, it can't mean Ottawa, Canada. And then sure enough,
yes.
Yeah.
So the history of this is pretty clear, I think. What took place during the Cold War was a series of proxy wars between the superpowers. And in countries as varied as Vietnam through to Angola, the United States and the Soviet Union as superpowers used proxies. And in the various conflicts that took place, very often these countries were absolutely huge. Angola is an absolutely vast country. And so I'm afraid the logic of war is often pretty cruel. And people used area denial weapons in order to be able to prevent people from getting into places. So landmines were laid on an absolutely extraordinary scale. So that's where our work began. We began actually in Afghanistan in 1988, and we spread quite quickly throughout all the countries of the Cold War. But of course, times have moved on, and now actually, rather than dealing with the proxy wars of the two superpowers, actually now what we're dealing with is the wars of insurgency, in which in Afghanistan, in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, in Somalia, we're having to face a very different threat. And we're also handling a much larger problem of small arms. People think of atomic bombs being the classic weapon of mass destruction, but actually the AK-47 Kalashnikov is the most lethal weapon that's ever been manufactured. It's killed far more people than any other single weapon system. And it is prolific around the world. It is held in absolutely vast numbers. And so we're very much involved in clearing those sorts of small arms and trying to get some management of those holdings that countries have. Very often in developing countries, weapons are not very well managed. They escape into the broader population, where they're put to nefarious purposes. So we're very much engaged in that. And another thing I point out is the holdings of large explosive stockpiles. And we've seen most recently, of course, in the Beirut explosion, which was not military-grade explosive material, but in fact, agricultural fertilizer, that this can be extremely dangerous in urban environments. And there are very large military-grade holdings that would have a very similar effect to what took place in Beirut, and we're also dealing with that. So we think we have a new purpose in the world. We came out of the situation in that Cold War period. And so just to answer your question, what took place in 1997 was very immediate. Princess Diana, Princess of Wales, came to Angola and saw what had happened. She was absolutely moved by it. And of course, only a month after her visit, she very sadly died in Paris in that terrible accident. And the countries of the world then decided that they would sign the landmine ban treaty, or to give it its formal name, the Ottawa Convention. And they came to Ottawa, and it was really Canadian leadership at that time that got countries to sign up to the landmine ban treaty. And it's an extraordinary example of the global community coming together and getting rid of a particular class of weapons. A fantastic achievement. So I salute Canada and very much hope that Canada will continue to play its part in the global campaign to get rid of these weapons.
I told my wife that I'd be talking to you, and she was pretty interested because she's heard about Halo Trust and the partnering that MAF does with Halo and Angola. And I said to her, so if you were interviewing, what would be your first question? And she said, well, I'd want to know if he met Princess Diana. And I said, well, I can't ask him that. But seriously, though, what can you talk to us a bit about the impact that Princess Diana and then later Prince Harry has had on Halo and the help that they provided the organization?
I did only meet Princess Diana once, actually, a long time ago. I left Sandhurst in 1986, and I met her then. It was a great privilege. But Prince Harry has been a fantastic supporter of the Halo Trust in recent years, and it was my privilege to take him to Angola last year. And indeed, we were flown by MAF aircraft whilst we were in Angola. And Prince Harry has this extraordinary convening power. He's a very charismatic, very natural individual. He has all of the charm of his mother. And he came out, saw what has been happening there, and knows that our efforts to clear Angola really reliant on international donors and indeed the Angolan government. And what's so interesting about Angola is that there's a connection between the demining campaign and conservation, because our program there is actually to clear the Angolan headwaters of the Okavango Delta. And sadly, those headwaters are being very damaged by poaching. And that poaching is caused by poverty, and that poverty is caused by landmines. So Prince Harry got that immediately. He's had a fantastic impact for us, and we're very lucky to have him as our royal supporter.
And is my understanding correct that Prince Harry was standing on some ground where a village now is, that prior to that had been a landmine field where Princess Diana was?
Well, more than a village, Brad. In fact, it's the city of Wambo that had been the very center of the war, and for many years was absolutely devastated. Princess Diana came out in the summer of 1997 and came to visit Halo clearing landmines on the edge of the city. Yeah. And she walked through this minefield down a lane, I should reassure you, we had cleared. That iconic photograph is up there with many other great photographs of the 20th century. So now what's so interesting is he walked down that same stretch of what was then completely overgrown countryside, not a building to be seen anywhere. And it's an absolute thriving street, shops, there's school children, there's the hustle and bustle of city life. And it shows that really our work is not simply a question of taking a landmine out of the ground for good. Well, we do take it out of the ground for good in both senses of the word, but it's really what follows in terms of livelihoods. You can't have a normal functioning economy if you think there's a landmine in the ground, and that's what's been achieved. It's a very visual thing, and it's an absolutely fantastic thing to behold.
That's got to be really very gratifying for you and your staff, and you have to take the long view in order to see that, because that takes, all of that takes quite a while to come to be.
It is extremely gratifying. You know, I think there are things out there in the world that are more important. You know, I think malaria or women's rights or children's education, but there's nothing really that beats the clearance of landmines for finality. You know, once it's gone, it's gone. It can't come back. So, you know, that is terrific, and it means that our donors can see what we're doing and they understand the benefit of our work. So it is extremely gratifying.
Can you take a minute and just talk to us about this Landmine Free 2025 campaign? Tell us what the goals there are.
So the Ottawa Treaty signatories, and they came together in Maputo in 2014. Every 5 years they have a conference to review progress against the treaty, and they decided that they needed a target. So they set 2025 as that target. And we're now working hard towards trying to achieve that target. Now, I think it's a story in two halves. You know, I think almost unlike anything else that's ever been attempted, it's actually going to be achieved in certain countries. And, you know, we've recently cleared Mozambique. I think that the next big country to be mine-free will be Sri Lanka. And it's a remarkable thing when you think about it. You know, that country that has, you know, very, very dense minefields, hundreds of thousands of people killed, you know, could be turned back to normality. But it's a story in two halves. And my sense is that whilst we'll get post-conflict countries mine-free, we're not going to achieve it within conflict countries, because places like Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria, they're still very sadly afflicted by conflict. And so that picture is not going away. Our role in the world is not going to end in 2025, but it is going to have changed quite a lot by that date.
Yeah. When you and I talked earlier, I part of the sense that I got as to how our organizations are similar was really when you and I started talking about COVID and just the impact that that's had on our staff. Can you just speak to that a bit and just tell us how COVID has impacted your work, and has it set you back a bit? What does that look like for Halo?
So we were obviously worried, like everybody else. You know, what did this mean? We had to think hard. And the first thing I decided was that we you know, I mentioned that hazardous word. This is part of our ethos. You know, we are here to be in hazardous environments. And we took a decision not to retreat, not to withdraw, not to come back to Europe and to North America. We could have. Yeah. You know, we decided to stick at it. So all of our programs remained open. And not only did we remain doing our work at clearing landmines, we offered ourselves up to both donors and to national authorities and said, look, you know, you have this fresh challenge. We are an organization that has the ability to plan. Many of us are ex-military. We have extensive logistics, we've got thousands of trucks, we've got ambulances, we've got medics. Our work is based around survey. You know, you can waste a lot of money clearing landmines in places that don't have them. So we always do detailed survey first, and we can pivot that survey capability from surveying minefields into track and trace needed for COVID. And we can offer risk education. You know, we've done a lot of postering and a lot of education for communities that are outside of a normal internet bubble.
Wow, so you've actually pivoted to that in some countries.
We have where we can and where it's needed.
That's impressive.
And we'd like to do more of it, to be honest. We think, you know, one of the problems with the humanitarian world is very stovepiped. People fund particular NGOs for particular reasons. They're very, very conservative, and they don't like to look outside of that stovepipe. And I think we're entering an era where in the next few years, when we realize that COVID is more of an economic crisis than a medical one, we're going to see a great deal of disruption and potentially conflict in the developing world. And we need to have responses ready in the developed world that can assist in a much more flexible way, and we'd like to be part of that.
Wow, that's fantastic. I didn't know that, and I hadn't even thought that you could pivot that way. But of course, you are this massive, talented, experienced logistics organization that can provide that relief. That's amazing. Just one last question: when you look ahead, and we talked about this 2025 goal. When you look ahead, what do you see as the largest challenges coming up for Halo?
So I think the thing I prize more than anything is people. I think that equipment, all that stuff is there to be bought. People can't be bought. My job is to recruit, train, and retain some incredibly talented people. I'm very privileged to have them. And I believe that we've been a fantastic employer. I think many organizations are letting go people. We're not going to do that. And I just want to make sure that I continue to prioritize my people above all else. But it isn't just the people I employ. We are ultimately a humanitarian organization, and our primary duty is to our beneficiaries. I think that as this COVID global economic recession takes hold, we're going to see a great many people in trouble across the world. I think all our focus, perhaps naturally, has been on our domestic preoccupations, but we're not paying enough attention to, I'm afraid, what's going to happen in the developing world. And it's time that we all began to think a little bit more widely about the situation, and we're slightly less selfishly focused, because I do think that this is going to be something that's going to be affecting us perhaps for the next decade or more.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to join us, and we are so proud to be partnering with you in a small way in Angola. So thank you, James.
Right, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for setting this up.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye then. Bye.
ខ្ញុំជាប្រជាជនខ្មែរនៅទៅកម្ពុជានៅភូមិនេះតែងតែរំនេះខ្ញុំតែងតែភ័យព្រួយរឿងមានដូចគ្នាប្រជាជននៅក្នុងភូមិនឹងខ្ញុំក៏ដូចគ្នារួចហើយនេះខ្ញុំបានគិតថាបើនេះខ្ញុំបានចូលជាអង្គការ Halo នេះខ្ញុំអាចបោះសម្អាតមីនបាន
Halo was founded in 1988. Our purpose, our mission is to save lives and protect people who are threatened by the deadly debris of war. We have around 100 international staff working with 6,000 local men and women in programs around the world. We work in Colombia, Angola, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Ivory Coast, the Central African Republic, Somalia, Kosovo, Ukraine, Georgia, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Burma, Laos, Cambodia. We're also in 4 territories: West Bank, Abkhazia, Nagorno-Karabakh and Somaliland. Well, we couldn't do our work without the many people and organisations and countries that support us. So I'd like to thank our donors, whether they be national, whether they be supranational, or whether they be private. Between 1988 and the end of 2015, we destroyed 708 bombs, 26,539 missiles, 174,591 guns, over 210,000 cluster munitions, 1,577,284 mines, nearly 11.5 million pieces of ordnance, and 54,901,000 bullets. We've cleared 12,622 minefields and over 425 million square metres. Now that's the equivalent of 39,184 football pitches, or a 100-metre wide strip 106 times around the Earth. Well, statistics only tell part of the story. We've benefited tens of millions of people, and in 2015 alone, over 1 million. It's prevented countless injuries and fatalities, enabled those displaced by conflict to return to their homes, and farmers to grow crops or graze animals in safety. And it's laid the foundations for vital development and reconstruction in fragile, war-torn countries. But despite everything that Halo has achieved, there's still a lot to do. The world is changing and Halo needs to change with it. Mine clearance will remain central to our work, and we are as committed as ever to getting mines out of the ground for good. However, we are increasingly also tackling the other deadly aspects of war: small arms, explosives, ammunition, and the ubiquitous improvised explosive device, the IED. We need to play our part in dealing with this debris of war. New challenges face us in the Sahel, the Maghreb, in the Middle East, the Caucasus, Southeast Asia, and wherever war next emerges. Halo has the capacity and skills to play a key role in getting vulnerable communities back on their feet after conflict. With the right partnerships and sustained funding, we can make this happen.